Part 85. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 853. It was a very hot day, but the maximum temperature stubbornly stayed at 39 degrees, because it would be a bit troublesome to reach 40 degrees. When I walked out of the office building, I felt a heat wave as soon as I came out. Lu Menjiao frowned slightly. Every time at this time, she missed life in Chengdu. Of course, Chengdu, as a plain city in a basin, should also be very hot at this time, but driving out of the city into the mountains, there are many scenic spots to visit. Stopping here or even staying there permanently to escape the heat, however, is a luxury in the eastern coastal plain. The black car still parked at the door on time, waiting to pick her up. It was a tacit understanding the two had developed over the years. But this time, when Lu Menjiao got into the car, she rarely took the initiative to say, "I thought you wouldn't come today. Actually, I didn't go to take orders all afternoon. I was just painting and writing at home." Su Yuhang was wearing a dark yellow gown. It was the kind of clothing worn by Kong Yuji in Mr. Lu Sun's works, but it was worn on Su Yuhang, but he didn't look shabby or embarrassed at all. Instead, he really looked like a celebrity from the Republic of China, even though this celebrity was a coachman. Lu Menjiao nodded. She knew that this might be Su Yuhang's character. Even if Su Yuhang puts his own main consciousness to sleep and uses several other separate consciousnesses to maintain operation, in the final analysis, each simple consciousness will, after all, it was also Su Yuhang himself. The medicine introduction is almost ready, and the timing is about the same, which means that these consciousnesses that were originally responsible for activities when the main consciousness is sleeping will be erased as the main consciousness wakes up, but he seems to be very calm and unhurried. Yes, if he is nervous, uneasy, angry, hesitant, and loses his sense of proportion at this time, then he is not worthy of the name Su Yuhang, Lu Menjiao thought in his heart. "No barbecue today?" Su Yuhang asked. Every night after get off work, Lu Menjiao was used to eating some late-night snacks. It's like he likes to draw and write. People have to do something interesting. There is a feeling that I am still alive. "Go home and cook," Lu Menjiao said. 20 years, oh no, it seems like this is the first time in your life that you plan to cook, Su Yuhang joked with a smile. Lu Menjiao stopped talking. Su Yuhang drove the car to the entrance of the vegetable market and stopped. Lu Menjiao got out of the car, and Su Yuhang got out of the car with him. The two of them didn't stay in the market for long, because Lu Menjiao only bought a few kilograms of water and some onions, ginger, and garlic. But Su Yuhang was not dissatisfied at all. He just kept following her with a smile. After buying, they got in the car and went home. Chop the green onions, boil cold water, drip some oil, put it under the water, wait until the noodles are fragrant, then take it out and put it into a bowl with seasonings, pour the soup over it and serve it. The two people sitting at the table both have a bowl of noodles in front of them. It can be regarded as vegetarian noodles. If you don't sprinkle a few drops of oil, it would be extremely vegetarian. The vegetarian noodles sold in the temple will also put a vegetarian chicken on it. It is garnished with green vegetables and other things, but these two bowls of noodles are extremely simple. "Are you thanking me or him?" Su Yuhang picked up the chopsticks and asked first without rushing to eat. "Is there any difference?" Lu Menjiao looked at Su Yuhang sitting across the table from him. "Aren't you him, and aren't he you? It's essentially right, but at this time, I still hope to make a difference. I am Su Yuhang, and he is also Su Yuhang, but he can't eat the noodles you made by yourself." Su Yuhang lowered his head and smelled it. It smelled delicious, and there was a look of satisfaction on his face. Lu Menjiao was silent. Her subject consciousness did not fall asleep, because the man did everything for her. The subject consciousness fell asleep so that the other consciousnesses could work more undisturbed. He did the work of several people by himself. Monitoring broadcasts, monitoring life, monitoring drug introduction, etc., and she only needs to be responsible for being bored every day. At the beginning, this is what he told her: "You have given birth to 2 children for me, and I have to do these things." He is a very hypocritical person, and also a very disgusting person. This is Lu Menjiao's evaluation of Su Yuhang, a person who will do whatever it takes to achieve his goals, and who doesn't even have the slightest bottom line to speak of, a person of the same kind as himself. "If you don't eat it, I'll throw it away," Lu Menjiao said as his face was getting cold. I eat. Su Yuhang started eating noodles. He ate very quickly and was very satisfied. There is a custom in Japan that the louder the sound when eating and the uglier the food looks, the more it proves your love for this dish and your knowledge of making it. A meal of respect. For a person who has been influenced by a culture beyond ordinary people since childhood, eating like this is perhaps the first time in his life for Su Yuhang. Lu Menjiao remembered that when the 2 of them were just ordinary listeners, they were embarrassed in a story world. When it came to eating the meat of the carrion, Su Yuhang slowly cut the carrion meat into thin slices with a knife and ate it carefully like sashimi. He also gobbled the meat around him and forced himself to swallow this disgusting thing. The audience was very dismissive of the idea of a quick meal to replenish energy. This is a man who values style above all else. A bowl of noodles, without being eaten, would disappear very quickly. Su Yuhang even drank the noodle soup, then patted his belly in a very unimpressive manner and said, "Thanks." Over the years, he has been by her side, and he is a glimpse of the real Su Yuhang. He is Su Yuhang, and Su Yuhang is him. But as he said just now, sometimes Lu Menjiao seems to think of him in a trance. An independent person, an ordinary person also named Su Yuhang. When she experiences life, he is there to help her. When she gets off work, she comes to pick her up. When she paints, he accompanies her as a photographer. The 2 of them are a harmonious couple in the eyes of countless different people in countless scenes, but both he and he knew that it was impossible and unnecessary for the 2 of them. Although this road is lonely, neither of them are timid people. In fact, on the contrary, being able to become the best among the listeners has shown that they are strong-minded and stand up to the broadcast as listeners. Being on the opposite side of the broadcast further proves what kind of rebels they are. This is not the slogan "I have no control over my fate" that the 2 of them like to shout. After all, only listeners can deeply taste and realize the horror of radio, and only listeners can truly understand the word resistance, the real pressure involved. "The medicine introduction is about to be ready," Su Yuhang suddenly said. He only learned the news through another person who was responsible for monitoring the broadcast, but he knew that she could know because she did not have separate consciousness. Her true self. So, she made him a bowl of noodles. This is farewell. Maybe some thanks. It is also an ending. She probably wasn't the one she wanted to say goodbye to, even though he had been with her for 20 years like an ordinary person. This is not a sad TV series. The pure love story and the drama between men and women will not be staged between him and her. Just as she understands him, he also understands her. He knew how heartless she was, how selfish she was, and how indifferent she was. She could even use up her own sister and then watch her rot. She was so indifferent to family affection that she didn't even exist at all. Motherhood is her truest portrayal. Therefore, he does not think that the point of this bowl of noodles is for him, but for her to commemorate these 20 years of seemingly ordinary life, 20 years of boring, 20 years of boredom, 20 years of waiting, and even say yes, 20 years of torture. I heard a piece of news today. It happened in Xiaoshiqiao. A guy with psychotic delusions locked himself in a safe and died of hunger and thirst inside. Su Yuhang would tell her some news and stories he heard every day to enrich his life, but today's story obviously has a different flavor. I've always been curious, why are you so? Lu Menjiao paused, seeming to organize her words. After a while, She continued, there is deep love and deep meaning. It's just appreciation. Su Yuhang stretched out his hand and rubbed it gently on the table, a person who can make broadcasts so afraid that he has to kill him by accident. He made a bet with me that radio wouldn't accept him as a listener under normal rules, and he won, and then he died. He is very good. Lu Menjiao said that the young master's experiment was the most important part of the two of them's plan, and even the starting point of their plan. When I learned of his death, I went to his villa and looked at his emaciated body. Then in the safe, I saw a few lines of words he left behind, and I bit my finger to write them. Words. You never told me about this, Lu Menjiao said. I want to wait until today, Su Yuhang said. At least today can prove that his research and our plan have seen the dawn of success. Well, you continue. The first sentence is, he is really afraid of me. The second sentence is, I feel like I am standing side by side with two kings. No more, Lu Menjiao asked. One more thing. What is it? Piss, it tastes really bad. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 854. In London, it was raining lightly and the temperature was only a dozen degrees. An old man in a black suit was sitting on a bench. In front of him was the entrance and exit of the train station. Next to the old man, stood a gentle young man wearing a black suit. The one wearing Arsenal's jersey looked a bit ignorant and childish. He stood beside the old man without saying a word or even moving. An old man and a young man, like two sculptures, stand here quietly. I don't know how long I waited like this, but the old man seemed to wake up from his nap, reached out and patted the raindrops on his body, and chuckled. Carrie, I really hate this damn weather in London. It is said that half of China is very hot now. The young man called Carrie by the old man answered. I remember you were not an Arsenal fan before, the old man joked. What a pity. Carrie shook his head, reached out and tugged at his jersey. I'm used to wearing jerseys when going out. The UK is a country with a strong football atmosphere, with many teams that have been established for more than a century. After the era of the Seven Sisters of Syria ended, the Premier League has become the league with the highest commercial value for many years. Many fans here come from generation to generation. Grandpas take their fathers, and fathers take their sons to watch football games. Often 3 generations of a family are die-hard fans of the same team. And Carrie's home team is not Arsenal. She will pass by here. If you are dissatisfied with anything, you can go and tell her, the old man sighed. I have nothing to say. When she wiped out that city, no one dared to come out and leave her behind. After such a long time, it is ridiculous to say that courage does not seem to increase or accumulate as time goes by. It's still possible to keep her, but the circumstances were a little special. In the train station, there was the sound of a train entering the station, but only the old man and the young man could hear this sound, and no one else could detect it at all. The old man stood up, looked at the sky and cursed the damn weather in his heart again, and walked into the train station. Carrie did not follow him into the train station, but still stood there waiting. He knew that he was not qualified to face that woman. He could better appreciate the old man's words before leaving. He could have kept her at first, but now, even if he had the courage, he could not do it. In fact, another reason why he chose to wear Arsenal's jersey when going out was that his home team's home jersey was very similar in style to Arsenal's jersey. However, his home team has disappeared forever with the disappearance of that city. In people's memory and cognition. Carrie sat down on the bench where the old man had been sitting. People were coming and going around him. Many people were curious about this young man who came out wearing a jersey but sat alone on a bench in the rain. As for the young man, his thoughts had already drifted past this rain curtain. In the distance, the sound of the train began to fade away, and the orderly sound that gradually faded away seemed to be a mockery that kept irritating the young man's eardrums. Damn it, this damn weather. The young man raised his head and faced the rain curtain, letting the rain hit his face. The old man walked into the train station and took off his coat while continuing to go deeper. He did not buy a ticket or go through the security check. He walked directly in like a ghost. There were many people around, but no one could see him. A green train slowed down a bit as it entered the station. Several train station managers were still standing by the tracks chatting, completely turning a blind eye to the sudden appearance of old-fashioned trains that looked like they were from the last century. The coat was lifted on his arm. The old man adjusted his white shirt with his other hand, and then took a step forward. The train did not stop and the door did not open, but the old man still entered the train directly. This is a very deserted train. There is no flight attendant, no driver, and only one passenger. The old man walked through several carriages before he saw a woman sitting alone in carriage number 13. The woman dragged her chin with one hand and was looking out the window intently. There was a layer of mist in her eyes, but it was not crying and weakness, but a barrier. Eyes are the mirror of the human heart, but her mirror has long been isolated from the world. "Beautiful lady, it's a pleasure to see you here, please forgive me for my presumptuous visit." The old man greeted the woman respectfully. Once upon a time, they were also members of the same generation, but this woman relied on her terrifying talent to surpass his generation at a speed that almost made the old man despair. Before he could get on the train, she had already returned by train. There is a difference, and now when I think about it, there is still a touch of bitterness in the old man's mouth. "Base, long time no see," the woman spoke, but she was still looking out the window with no intention of standing up. "You still remember me?" The old man named Base sat down on the seat opposite the woman. Then, just silence. Women don't want to say anything. And old Base had a lot to say but didn't know how to say it. The scenery outside the car window is constantly changing. The speed of this green leather train also exceeds the description of physical speed, because only a little while ago, old Base has already seen the Indian market outside the car window. It means that the train has traveled from England to India in this moment. After a while, it was already covered with snow outside the window. "Are you going back to China with me?" the woman asked, looking at old Base. Old Base smiled and didn't know how to answer. Everyone has his or her own aura. Before entering the train, old Base did not think that he would be affected by other people's auras. But unfortunately, he was wrong. When he stood in front of this woman, I was really suppressed by this woman's aura. She didn't want him to talk too much and he would really be speechless. This woman is really terrible. Finally, Chinese plagues began to appear outside the train windows. Old Base shook his head and simply stopped asking. When the train crossed the mountains of Sichuan and entered the center of the basin, the woman stood up and walked to the door. "When will this train leave?" It seemed that as the woman was about to get off the train and it seemed that this question was not a problem, old Base finally spoke. "Soon," the woman replied. "Then I won't get out of the car." Old Base chose a comfortable angle, closed his eyes, and began to take a nap. The return of the train meant that the time for the train to leave again was approaching. He knew that he would definitely be issued a ticket this time, so old Base simply planned to stay on the train and wait for it to leave again. The woman didn't say anything, she just leaned forward and walked out of the car. "Dear passengers, you are welcome to Chengdu East Railway Station. Please take good care of your luggage and listen carefully to platform announcements." After walking out of the platform, outside, the sun was dazzling, and the scorching temperature was scorching the earth. However, there seemed to be no difference between the people coming and going under the sun and the ants crawling on the ground. At least this scorching heat was for everything. Is fair. Among the crowd outside the platform, there stood a middle school student in school uniform. The student stood there without a drop of sweat on his body. On the contrary, when he passed by, he could feel a coolness similar to the air conditioner. The woman stopped and looked at the student in front of her. The student came over, looked at the woman and said with a smile, Sister, you are back. Um. There are not many pleasantries, but if the time goes back 2 years, this scene can at least look warmer on the surface. If the time goes back more than 10 years, it will be completely sincere and equal to both parties. Of sincerity. It's just that now, it seems that the distance between the two people is already very far. Being able to look like they are on the surface is already the result of self-restraint among middle school students. Jameme can't come, the middle school student said, he's missing. The woman and the middle school student were walking side by side. The two of them didn't call for a taxi, they just walked under the scorching sun. Sister, there is something I want to confirm with you. It just so happens that you are back. The middle school student seemed to muster up some courage. In fact, he knew clearly that he was not qualified to talk to this woman on an equal footing, but there were some things that a definite result is really needed. No need to ask, what you think is right. The woman seemed very happy, but she seemed to want to save herself this trouble. Is it appropriate for you to do this? A sly smile appeared on Chen Guang's face. At least, we all love you and treat you. Have you ever killed anyone? The woman suddenly asked. Not the audience in the story world, but ordinary people in the real world, the woman continued. Chen Guang was silent. Of course he had killed. Within the scope allowed by the broadcast, listeners could kill ordinary people according to certain circumstances, as long as they didn't go too far. So, your question still doesn't need an answer. Are you right? But people are all selfish. Now I just think about the relationship between us brothers and sisters and you, eldest sister. You also said that people are selfish. The woman interrupted Chen Guang again. What about Hai Mei? Chen Guang put that matter aside and didn't intend to continue talking, so he changed the topic. He won't die, because that person can't get out. As long as he can't get out, no one will be willing to kill for him, the woman said very calmly. Sister, you let Hai Mei steal his son. His parents also stole me. A smile appeared at the corner of the woman's mouth. Look, you asked the same nonsense question as before. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 855. A Bowl of Noodles, a Story. This is the farewell ceremony Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao each prepared for themselves. There is no brilliance like fireworks. There is no roar of salutes. There is no sense of sanctity or hustle and bustle in the eyes of secular people. Because they are the two people who have traveled the furthest and are also the loneliest in this world. The story was finished, and at this moment, Su Yuhang, who was sitting at the dinner table, found that his legs had disappeared. Lu Menjiao sat across from him, watching with cold eyes. He had already said goodbye, and therefore, when the farewell really came, there was really no need to pretend to be polite. Before a sword is unsheathed, all preparatory movements must be completed. Now, if his main consciousness is to wake up, he must recover all the individual consciousness that was previously arranged outside. Su Yuhang was not surprised, nor was he sentimental at all. He was not a pretentious person, so naturally he couldn't do anything pretentious. They had a lot of time, and 20 years, to others, was the most important period in their lives, but for them, it is just a penance like waiting. They are used to seeing the blood and turmoil in the story world, and experiencing the weirdness in the audience circle, and then go back and bury themselves among ordinary people, and press themselves among all the living beings in the real world. For them, this is not what they have done after climbing a mountain. The value of tranquility is not understood only after passion. It's a kind of torture, a kind of punishment. After getting used to fine wines and delicacies, I turn back to eat Guanyin soil. No one can bear this kind of gap. As for the so-called saints, He he. There are no true saints in this world. Suyuhang at the dining table is disappearing, and the Suyuhang lying in the bedroom is also disappearing. This is the end of a chapter, and it also marks that the plan has finally reached the next stage. Lu Menjiao stretched out her hand, and a ring appeared on her ring finger. The ring was blue, as if there were vast stars hidden inside, and Lu Menjiao's temperament suddenly changed at this time. It's not as sharp as expected, but it has a touch more elegance than before. When all Suyuhang in the room disappeared completely, Lu Menjiao stood up and looked at the living room and the two empty bowls on the table. In his eyes, there was no trace of reluctance, but just a sense of relief. He opened the door and walked out. Outside, the moon was sparse, and outside the house, a man in a black robe stood on the steps, bowing slightly to Lu Menjiao, who came out, and at the same time spread his hands, making a gesture ready to hug. "I haven't seen you in 20 years. Let's give you a hug." Suyuhang's face had an innate sense of joking. Well, at least in Lu Menjiao's eyes, she had always been indifferent to this exquisite face that could charm thousands of girls. "If you want to fight each other after we prepare for 20 years, you can hug me." Lu Menjiao's voice was clear. Suyuhang took a step back and hugged himself. "Then I can only give myself a hug." Time passes slowly. 20 years later. Since today, it seems that the two of them have regained the feeling they had when they were listeners. Only, this time their opponents are no longer the other listeners nor the dangers set up by the radio in the story world, but the broadcast itself. "Jaja, I'm starved to death, Jaja, I'm thirsty to death." A skeleton walked out of the safe in the wall. He staggered with strong complaints and eagerness. The 9 audience members present were all people who had seen the world, so they were not frightened by the skeletons that suddenly ran out, but after all, everyone's strength was inexplicably sealed now, and they did feel a little weak in their hearts. The current body, after all, is the original body. It is not like the body designed by the game in the first scene. Death is just the loss of a life in the game. If you can put coins in, you can actually come back again. But if he dies this time, he really dies. 2 blue lights flashed in the skull's eyes, and Subai slowly stood up. The dim light suddenly became brighter, and at the same time, the complaining voice suddenly changed. "Oh, I'm dead, ha 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 ha, you really didn't dare to harvest me into that thing, you're scared, right, you're scared, right." The skeleton was shouting and laughing at the same time, and the way it danced was very funny. The originally depressing atmosphere was abruptly turned into a humorous comedy style. As if he had temporarily forgotten the torture of hunger and thirst, the skeleton slowly walked towards the center of the laboratory. The audience around him gave way to him. The skeleton did not care about anyone present, including Subai. This surprised Subai. After all, if nothing else happened, he had already guessed the identity of this person, the confident man who once whispered alone in front of him after Suyuhang left. He should now be the same blood corpse that appeared in the story world before, a clone copied from the broadcast. But what was the reason that the broadcast kept the scene here as the story world and cloned it? "Did you let me out on purpose?" The fire in the skull's eyes kept changing color. He raised his head and looked at the flat wall above. "Did you let me out on purpose to watch the show?" The skeleton's gibbering and madness made most of the audience present feel a little baffled. At first, everyone thought that the skeleton was the NPC that triggered the task in the second scene, but it didn't seem to be the case, because it was the person it was talking to. If nothing unexpected happens, it seems like a broadcast. Where is the broadcast? Above your head. For listeners, whether in the East or the West, the status of radio in their hearts is almost infinitely equal to that of the supreme existence in their respective cultural systems, and the most awe-inspiring thing in the inheritance of each civilization is, in fact, it is the sky above your head. He, this young master must have died, right? What does this mean, the skeleton rubbed his hands together and wiped out a piece of bone. Then the skeleton said angrily, "You are so frugal and cut corners. You don't even give me your skin and flesh. Uncle Joe, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I want to eat, I want to drink red wine." The skeletons were shouting and making a fuss. But the old housekeeper, who was called Uncle Joe, was still sitting on the bed in his small room, motionless. He, who was almost omnipotent in the first mission scene, seemed to have lost all abilities at this time and became a bit cold. The skeleton slowly squatted down, holding his head in his hands, and then turned slightly sideways. This moment, he finally set his sights on Subai. There were other audience members such as Hills standing next to Subai, so this move did not deliberately isolate Subai. But from the flickering light in his eyes, Subai could clearly feel that the other party's eyes were falling on him. Now that the introduction to the medicine is familiar, the effects of the medicine should come out, ha 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 ha, the effects of the medicine should come out, and you have all become ordinary people, right? This space has also stopped working. It has begun to be paralyzed. The so-called rules are being paralyzed. Ha 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 ha, success, success. He was showing off, he was having fun, he was dancing like a child, seeming to be applauding his masterpiece. Hills frowned slightly. This NPC, no, this skeleton in front of him can no longer be called an NPC. What is going on? Uncle Joe should also be dead. You listeners have also had their strength sealed, and his entire story world operation system is beginning to enter a dormant state with this story world as the core. I succeeded, now it's up to you. The you he said naturally did not refer to the audience present. At this moment, a radio announcement suddenly sounded in everyone's minds. Dear listeners, welcome to the horror radio show. I am the host of the show. I don't have a name because names have no meaning here. But for most people, a name is a symbol that stays with them throughout their lives. So, when this crazy skeleton appears in front of you, are you curious? Do you find it surprising? Do you think it's ridiculous? Next, release the main task 2. Find the name of the skeleton. This is a group main mission. As long as someone can find their name and shout it out, the mission will be completed and all members will return to the real world. The rewards for main mission 2 will be notified after the story world ends. Oh, there is another notification. It's that the story world will collapse in 12 hours. So, please everyone, hurry up. This is a radio mission notice, and it is in line with the usual style of broadcasting. However, the 9 listeners present were stunned for a moment after listening to this notice. Something seems wrong? Yes, something is wrong. The announcer's voice was a bit hoarse and rushed. Hills, who was standing next to Subai, suddenly whispered, "This task was announced in an anticlimactic and full of loopholes, which is not in line with the style of broadcasting." Perhaps, think about what the skeleton said before, that the broadcast has begun to paralyze. If what he said is not crazy, then it seems to be completely different from the tone when the broadcast released the mission and the 12 hours later. Reminders of the collapse of the story's world can echo. Broadcast. Is something really starting to go wrong? Hey, what's your name? One of the audience members asked the skeleton directly with the attitude of giving it a try. My surname is Zhao, and my name is. At this time, the dim light in the skeleton's eyes suddenly went out, leaving only a skeleton standing in place. Everyone sighed, knowing in their hearts that things would not be that simple. Let's divide the work. This is Zhao's villa. We have to find information about the owner of the villa within 12 hours. We must not miss any detail, not even the bookmarks in a book, Hills said. At this time he ordered. Subai, on the other hand, fell into deep thought at this time. Like. Where is it? Something's wrong. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiao Long. Chapter 856. The gaze of broadcasting suddenly moved away from the real world, and its impact on the entire audience circle was huge. If only big-shot listeners and some high-level listeners with special channels could experience it at the beginning. So, as the listeners who were originally on Story World missions began to be transported back to the real world in batches almost at the same time, the abnormal behavior of the broadcast really caused a huge stir. In normal times, the broadcast has never taken a break, but at least during those few times, everything was still going on in an orderly and calm manner. The broadcast was like a gentleman, maintaining a good posture and indicating that it was temporarily withdrawing from everyone's sight. Then make an appointment and show up on time. But this time, it seemed a little too hasty and awkward. The calmness that I had before seemed to be invisible this time. The ongoing tasks have been terminated, and the tasks that were originally scheduled and sent notifications are now found to have been postponed indefinitely. This feeling is like the Chinese people woke up one morning in 1991 and suddenly learned that the person next door used to love and hate them. The Big Brother suddenly collapsed overnight. Audience circles in the East, West, and even around the world fell into a strange silence at this time. Everyone was waiting for the subsequent development of the situation. Everyone seemed very cautious. On the roof of AB/U0026B on the Urhai Lake, the fat man, who had almost been reduced to a self-propelled gun in the shape of a human being in the scenic area recently, calmed down for a rare moment. He sat obediently with the monk and the Buddha and drank tea. He said he was watching the sea view, but in fact it was nothing more than the three brothers getting together to hug each other and keep warm on this day when the future was suddenly uncertain. Plus Dabai who lived there, they could be considered four people gathered together. It seems like it's not that simple. The three of them summarized the information they learned through their respective channels sentence by sentence. Finally, the monk came to this conclusion. The centipede is dead but not stiff. No matter how shabby the family is, they will embarrass themselves in favors and pretend to be fat. When Pui was kicked out of the palace and rented in other people's homes, he would also have a big pilgrimage during the New Year and festivals. If you let those old people from the Manchu Qing dynasty kneel in front of you and watch the show, you will not believe that broadcasting will really sink to this level. Whether it is the sudden termination of the story world or the infinitely postponed scheduled story world arrangement, it all shows a feeling of war and chaos. If the audience circle is compared to a country, radio is a dictator. If this dictator slowly declines and dies step by step, then the people under him will naturally be overjoyed, but like this overnight the current dictator seems to be on the verge of becoming a GG, and the city is about to change into a royal flag. Even the people who have been oppressed before can't help but feel worried. It makes sense. Even if the broadcast encounters a big problem, I don't think it should be so embarrassed, unless it deliberately wants to completely destroy the fear it has imprinted on our souls for so many years. It doesn't fit the aesthetic of broadcasting, it really doesn't fit. Buddha touched his nose. There was beer on the table. He didn't like it very much. In other words, after he advanced, he was no longer so kind to alcohol. The aesthetics of broadcasting, Fatty repeated at this time, there is indeed something wrong. Although we all know that broadcasting is supreme, I also feel that broadcasting actually has a personality. We cannot say that he is a person, but he has some of the hobbies and interests that talents possess, but from a human perspective, they should not suddenly act like this, no matter how great the difficulties and crises are for them. Once we, the listeners, lose our visceral fear of it, it will undoubtedly become more difficult for broadcasters to calmly allow listeners to cooperate in creating fun and storytelling in the story world in the future. But all our current speculations, based on the abnormal performance of broadcasting, are derived from one basic point, that is, the broadcasting is abnormal. But if the broadcasting really encounters extremely difficult troubles, so really do you have no time to care about it, the monk suddenly said at this time. For example, an existential crisis for broadcasters. Dolly's ultraviolet rays are abundant, and it is easy for tourists from out of town to get sunburned. However, under the scorching sun, the three people sitting on the roof without any shade suddenly felt a chill. Something that can cause a life or death crisis for broadcasters. What will it be? Life or death crisis? Lychee stretched out her hand, took out a grape, and slowly put it into her red lips. Beside her, there were several listeners from Sichuan and near Sichuan, including Chen Guang, and among them there was a newly promoted college student in the past 2 years. The rest are at the level of senior listeners. Her return was not deliberately hidden or even low-key. The roar of the train and the sound of hitting the rails were felt by even the big-name audiences in the Western world, let alone the domestic audiences. Because of this, not even half a day after she came back, nearby listeners rushed over. Of all the people present, only Lizzie was sitting. Even the big-name audience member in Sichuan was not seated. The identity and qualification order of the audience circle established under the fear of broadcasting was clearly visible at this time, even now. Broadcasting seems to have collapsed, but the influence of this rule is actually still there. Don't underestimate the radio. After saying this, Li Ji stood up. Things are not as complicated as you think, but they are indeed more exaggerated than you think. Chen Guang stood aside and said nothing. The eldest sister in front of her would naturally say it when she wanted to. No one could make her speak what she didn't want to say. However, there is one thing that Chen Guang doesn't understand. The sudden return of the eldest sister at this time seems to be too deliberate, and it is no surprise that she meted these listeners who were a little uneasy due to the turbulence of the broadcast, which was not in line with her previous experience. Always a cold style. Of course, this may also be because I used to be too far away from my eldest sister, but recently I have grown taller. Some things may have completely different feelings when viewed from a distance and up close. Lychee seemed to be waiting for something, and everyone waited with her. Finally, she stood up. Luda, I leave it to you to take care of Jaime. Find him and rescue him. I owe you a favor. Luda was the only boss-level audience member present. He nodded and indicated that he accepted the request. However, the audience members were also smart people. After Lizzie just asked him to help with something, Luda immediately asked, "What kind of place is the end of the train?" After the boss-level listeners reach a certain level, they will receive train tickets. This green train has only seen people being transported there, but few people can come back. Lychee's return this time is a special case. The last person who could come back was the blood corpse, but the blood corpse was already crazy when he came back. It is a frightening place, and the unknown is the direct factor that most directly touches people's inner fear and uneasiness. Lychee casually pulled out a wet wipe, wiped her hands, then threw the wet wipe into a paper basket at her feet, pointed at it and said, "This is it." After finishing speaking, Li Ji's figure disappeared in front of everyone. Her return and stay naturally had her purpose, and it was even so important that she didn't even have time to personally rescue Jaime out of trouble. Luda and a group of audience members all stared at the paper basket. Chen Guang noticed that Luda had a sad look on his face. The end of the train. Is it a garbage dump? Then the big-name listeners who have been transported by train. Equivalent to what? Trash will always be trash. Su Yuhang took a deep breath. Tell me, how many pairs of eyes are staring at us now? Rather than watching, it's better to say that I'm suffering and waiting, Lu Menjiao said. I have always been curious about the training model of radio. While it trains people to become stronger and stronger, it can also constantly amplify people's fear, and even, in the end, they are willing to sit on that train that transports garbage. Throw yourself away like trash. It's more acceptable for them to be a feral cat digging in the garbage than to have a head-on confrontation with a broadcaster. Moreover, Su Yuhang, you are so shameless. If you hadn't met Zhao, can you say that you would definitely take this path? Maybe, maybe, Su Yuhang said. There is no way to compare or assume this. After all, what Zhao represents is not just the poison of the plan. I go to the west, you go to Xian, it's the toxin is almost gone. Why don't we switch over? You should know that when your goddaughter comes back from the garbage heap, she is not just like her parents. You are more suitable to face her, aren't you? Lu Menjiao was non-committal and just murmured, she is also ready to take our path. The premise is that we have to lose, otherwise she will have no way to go. Su Yuhang suddenly sighed, let out a long breath, and said, oh, in the blink of an eye, our son and goddaughter have grown up in the blink of an eye 20 years ago. Oh, haha, Su Yuhang, really never thought that one day I would be able to have both children and a daughter. Big dream, have you ever thought about this day? There is something in your words. Lu Menjiao looked into Su Yuhang's eyes and asked seriously, don't tell me, you regret it now. It's not that I regret it, and I will never regret it. Su Yuhang's fingers trembled slightly, and a Bagua array appeared under his feet, and a wave of space rippled around him. At the same time, deep inside a Greek monument the body also began to tremble slightly, as if in response. Before the body was teleported out, Su Yuhang sighed. Damon, have you never thought about it, if we didn't take this path, what kind of style would it be like if we now have a grown-up son and a beautiful and caring goddaughter? Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 857. Why are you still here? Half an hour later, Hills returned to the laboratory and looked at Subai, who was still in the laboratory and sitting next to the skeleton. It's nothing. Subai shook his head. He still didn't want to explain. After all, he was just relying on a feeling, a vague feeling, with no real evidence at all, and the speculation he expressed was more like a conjecture. Hills held a glass of red wine in his hand. Even though the world of this story will collapse in 11 hours, and even though the identity of the owner of the mountain villa, that is, the skeleton, is still unknown, it still cannot stop Hills from continuing to be himself. Living habits and ways. Of course, this can be regarded as a kind of passive resistance, because Hills knows very well that the mission of broadcasting this time is very abrupt and also very unreasonable. Do you know what qualities skeletons have? After a long time, Subai, who was sitting next to the skeleton, suddenly spoke. Huh, Hills was stunned for a moment, then continued, I would like to hear the details. The two parties communicated in Chinese, and it can also be seen from this that Hills's own Chinese proficiency and his deep influence from Eastern culture can be seen. A skeleton is a corpse that has been stripped of its skin and flesh, but it can still retain the most basic posture of a human being. Subai stood up, faced the skeleton, and slowly rubbed his palm on the skull. It has limbs, a head, a chest, and a torso. It is like a piece of art that has been stripped of all other cumbersome carvings and turned into its most essential and pure form. Because of this, when a person faces a skeleton, even if it is a very ordinary skeleton, it will still give people the illusion that it is about to move. Because people subconsciously regard the jagged skeletons in front of them as their own kind. The divergence and associative nature of human thinking, Hills added, but he was slightly confused because he didn't know what Subai wanted to express. I didn't suddenly develop a feeling similar to that of an artist here. Now, I am just emotionally describing the things in front of me from the perspective of thinking that I am a human being, a normal person, Subai continued. Road. Hills took another sip of red wine. Now the rest of the audience were rummaging around the villa looking for clues. He was still here with a guy of the same level who seemed to be as abnormal as the broadcast after entering the second scene. Talking nonsense here. Well, Hills doesn't object to such nonsense. It's the same reason. After all, the other party is at the same level as him, and at the same time, the other party has defeated him before. Continue. Hills felt like a listener, listening to what Subai had to say. Subai slowly inserted his fingers from the eye sockets of the skull. Why did we think it was alive just now? In other words, it is not alive, but it has self-awareness, such as being able to speak, such as being able to perform actions. Hills pondered for a moment and replied, because there are two blue fires in its eye sockets. Yes, there are two blue balls of fire, Subai repeated, and then continued, then, just because the two balls of fire in the eye sockets are missing, we think it is dead, or in other words, don't you have behavioral awareness anymore? What on earth do you mean? Is it really dead? Subai stared at the skeleton in front of him and said word by word. Probably dead. But my stomach is still moving. Cats are said to have 9 lives. An ordinary black country cat was lying on its side on the road. It must have just been hit by a car and was now dying. However, the people passing by could at most sigh, but no one was kind enough to take it home for treatment immediately. At this time, a woman wearing a blue floral skirt came over. She squatted down and held the black cat in her arms very carefully. Without showing too much pity or talking to herself anxiously, she just squatted down calmly, stood up calmly, and left with the black cat in her arms. Here, located next to the Lintung Terracotta Warriors and Horses Historical Museum, it is considered a small town. The black cat in the woman's arms looked dying at first, but gradually, the wounds on its body began to recover at a speed visible to the naked eye, and its breath began to return to normal. The woman stopped in front of a night food stall. The sign on the food stall read the sentence: "Some people are alive, but they are dead, some people are dead, but they are still alive." This passage comes from Zhang Ke's Some People, but it is obvious that the owner of the food stall who is frying snails did not want to use its original meaning when he hung it up as a plaque, but a way to carry it with him. Make a joke in a mocking way. This passage is not about the difference between the bureaucracy and revolutionaries in old China, but about Qin Shi Huang. In Lintung, there is this jingle: Qin Shi Huang made a fortune by turning over the Communist Party and becoming the master. The first emperor died for more than 2,000 years, but in 1974, a Shaanxi villager discovered broken pottery figurines while digging a well. This large-scale imperial mausoleum was truly discovered and learned about by the world. Since then, local people have relied on it to walk around. After embarking on the road of tourism development and prosperity, even though the first emperor has been dead for more than 2,000 years, he is still taking care of people's lives today. The woman sat down at an empty table and ordered a fried escargot and a bowl of noodles. Seeing that she was an extremely beautiful woman, the boss didn't have any other ideas in his mind. He just gathered up his energy and started working on his craft. Putting down the black cat in his arms, the black cat ran away with a swoosh sound. His eyes were full of fear. He didn't seem to have the slightest affection for the person who had just saved him. He could only rely on his distance to the superordinary human spirit, sensed a despair-like terror from this woman. The snails were brought up first, and the noodles were not ready yet, so the woman did not move, because in front, a woman about 30 years old walked over and sat down at the same table. "Haven't seen you for a long time," Lu Menjiu greeted. Li Qi didn't react at all. She just looked at the woman in front of her with eyes that were so calm that even a big rock wouldn't be able to hit her. "I still remember that when I was a child, my holiday was not the Spring Festival or Children's Day, but the day when the dean's uncle and dean's aunt came to visit everyone in the orphanage. Everyone would gather around the dean's uncle and dean's aunt and laugh and make fun with. Not everyone can take this road." Lu Menjiu looked at Li Ji as if he was reminding or warning, but it was indeed difficult for these two women to have affectionate scenes. "Not necessarily," Li Ji said. "Your uncle and I are different from you. I can see it." Li Ji raised his head and looked at the sky. "If there hadn't been something wrong with it, it wouldn't have been that easy to come back from there. At least I couldn't do this." "It brought you back on purpose," Lu Menjiu reminded. "No, it doesn't bother to do that. We are not talking about the same thing. Lu Menjiao stood up and faced the Terracotta Warriors and Horses History Museum. This road can only be walked once, because there will never be a second chance. Your uncle and I won't give you this opportunity either. Back then, you wanted to turn me into a bai, but you failed. Lychee sighed and continued, today, what you said to me is so similar to what it was before. The reason why we failed on you is because we focused all our plans on a bai. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to escape at all. I hate absolute. Lychee shook her head slightly, I hate you even more. But by stealing my grandson, aren't you planning to turn yourself into a new person like me and your uncle? The medicine doesn't taste good, but sometimes if you don't take the medicine, you will die. Lychee and Lu Menjiao looked at each other. If you come back in a hurry just to say these words to me and show your little stubbornness, to be honest, I will be very disappointed. For you, the real way out should be to fight for the other side of the train. Completely resolved. It can't be solved over there. Lychee chuckled, at least, it won't be possible within 10 years, and it will take at least 2 or 3 more generations of listeners to complete it. If you and your uncle and the people who were killed by you all go to that place, maybe I can see the dawn of the end now. But even so, what's the point? Lychee stood up and blocked Lu Menjiao's path. The dawn does not mean a glimmer of hope, it only represents a fantasy at most. Lu Menjiao stretched out her hand, intending to push the Lychee away. And Lychee also stretched out her hand. The two women's hands touched. Boom. Suddenly there was a thunder in the sky, and then heavy rain poured down. The rain came so suddenly, and the thunder came so unexpectedly that the owners and guests at the food stall immediately moved tables and food and ran to the store to take shelter from the rain. While the boss hurriedly collected the ingredients placed outside, he raised his head and looked outside with some confusion. He remembered that when the thunder sounded, there seemed to be 2 women standing outside. But with the sound of thunder, both women disappeared. He should have taken shelter from the rain, the boss thought, but he was completely unaware of the terrifying energy vortex that he and the people around him were in just now. You can't stop me, and I don't want to attack you at this time. Within the barrier, Lu Menjiao's voice became very hollow. Try it in front of me, and see if you can induce the great Qin war spirit buried here for more than 2,000 years to go with you. What is your purpose for doing this? I don't think you know what the 2 emperors left behind more than 2,000 years ago, Lu Menjiao asked doubtfully. But I have seen people similar to them, and I have also seen with my own eyes the arrangements they made for future generations to continue and counterattack the world before they fell. A smile appeared on the corner of Lizzie's mouth. This was her first time tonight. Laughing, Auntie Dean, don't keep good things to yourself. This is what you taught us kids when we were young. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 858. This is a war between 2 women. It is different from the intrigues in previous palace dramas, and it is also different from pulling hair and grabbing buttons on the street. The conflict between the 2 of them seems more noble and more otherworldly. But in essence, there was once a relationship similar to that of mother and daughter, and now there is a relationship between competitors. Under the chaotic and complicated relationship between each other, the only thing left is the determination that no one can take a step back. Around Lu Menjiao's body, mental storms condensed one after another. The thunder in the sky was really a manifestation of the friction between his mental thinking and the real world at this time, and was no longer just an exaggeration of brainstorming. Similarly, the surrounding sky seemed to have to bow before his spiritual consciousness at this moment. On the other hand, Lychee looked a little more simple and crude. Her figure was constantly swaying in the storm, and the corners of her clothes and skirts were also flying. It didn't look like she was fighting, but more like she was performing her own performance in the air. Dance interprets its own art. This was a duel that took place 20 years ago. 20 years ago, she was hesitating, and she was still young and ignorant. She was hesitant and brought her young self from Guangzhou to Chengdu with a bunch of lychees. 20 years later, she is no longer hesitant, and she is no longer young. Some accounts, some grudges were constantly being sorted out and messed up, but it turned into a narrow encounter in a battle. There is not much time to distinguish between right and wrong, and there is no need to sort out these meaningless things. You have to go forward. I can't let you go. It's that simple. It's just a pain for the whole Lintong. Originally, a sudden heavy rain in the hot summer is a pleasant thing, but these strings of lightning, thunder, and hurricanes made the hearts of ordinary people below rise. Infinite fear arose. Many people have captured the moment of lightning or the oppression of dark clouds and posted it on their WeChat moments, jokingly asking, "Are any fellow Taoists going through the tribulation?" But the scene in the sky at this time is really like the end of the world, especially the groans coming from the sky, which are more like a heavy hammer hitting people's chests. At this time, it seems that the blood is deep in the what arose was not only fear, but also an urge to worship. Once upon a time, modern people used to ridicule their ancestors for kneeling down in the face of lightning and thunder to worship the so-called gods in their eyes. Modern people ridiculed the ignorance of their ancestors, but they never knew that they were not standing by the windowsill. A person that others treat as scenery? Is the worship that is often seen in the murals of ancestors really just pure worship and kowtow, a normal phenomenon in nature? Who can know what is happening in the towering sky? A 10-minute stalemate may not seem too long for a martial arts movie, but in fact, in a real life and death fight, the outcome can often be determined in just a few breaths. A while ago, Subai and Hills, even though the duel seems to be a back and forth, the actual time from start to finish is only 3 or 2 minutes. You are much weaker than I thought. Lychee's eyes flashed with doubts. The dean and aunt in front of her, who had left a huge shadow on her childhood, felt disappointed after the real fight. Lizzie had simulated this confrontation many times in her mind. For most of her listening career, the woman and the man in front of her had always been her target and imaginary enemy, but it seemed that her expectations were too high, so when I was actually doing this, I had a feeling of nothing more than that. These 20 years have been about waiting, Lu Menjiao said calmly, not about hard training. As soon as he finished speaking, Lu Menjiao gently opened his hands, and the dark clouds in the sky dispersed with this movement. A ray of light appeared from the dark night in an extremely strange manner, as if a blood demon was turning and swaying. You can't enter the story world, you can't do anything out of the ordinary, you can't understand, you can't touch the nerves of the rules, and you can't make the slightest mistake. In this environment, even if you give it another 20 years or 200 years, it will be difficult to obtain not the slightest bit of progress. I'm quite satisfied now, at least I didn't get knocked down by you, otherwise it would be too embarrassing. Then what are you relying on? Lizzie asked. You guys like this can actually avoid the broadcast's gaze. Although the two women were communicating and talking, their movements with each other did not stop. The rays of light like a blood enchantment roared out, drawing an invisible ravine from the air and rushing directly towards Lychee. Once upon a time, this was Lu Menjiao's commonly used ability. Under this ability, countless strong men were reduced to idiots and their sanity was directly destroyed. However, at this time, Lychee just raised his head slightly, spread his arms, and a city appeared at his feet. Fortunately, it was at night, and dark clouds were rolling in and rain was pouring. If it were during the day, this would definitely be a shocking mirage scenery. Lychee moved her fingers slightly, as if to seduce something. Then, the shadow of the city erupted with overwhelming resentment, and the roars of countless dead souls began to roar out. For a moment, the thick ink-like color completely covered up the original appearance of the dark clouds, and the majestic sense of depression poured out in an overwhelming manner. And out. Wherever the blood demon goes, the dead souls dissipate, as if they have been freed. However, no matter how sharp the blood demon is, it cannot continue to maintain its indomitable attitude when it is trapped in countless dead souls. Am I helping you to pay your debt? Lu Menjiao said with understanding. It's your debt. Lichi stared at Lu Menjiao in front of him. These people died because of you, otherwise I would have become the abai I am now a few years ago. I'm targeting you, not these people. Lu Menjiao shook his head slightly. Your selfish demeanor is really very similar to mine. Do you know? When I walked on the street and kidnapped you, it was not because I saw how cute and well behaved you were, but because when I first saw you, I felt that you and we were both selfish and indifferent. It was as if we were seeing another young child. Of myself. The two women stirred up the storm and thunder in the air, and they were still at odds with each other during the conversation. It's too pretentious to say this now. Lichi's consciousness has been locked on Lu Menjiao in front of him. You must have spent the past 20 years studying how to hide here and there. Hai Mai Mei once followed Subai to Qinhuangdao according to Lizzie's wishes. However, although there was a mirror in the cave under Qinhuangdao, it was not their real hiding place. This meant that for a long time, Lizzie had not been there. Find that perfect way to hide from the broadcast gaze. In the audience circle of this era, or even in the audience circle of past generations, there are actually quite a few listeners who know about the existence of this couple. Because these two are role models, many listeners think they are avoiding the radio. The method of looking at it is because someone has done it, but I haven't done it because I didn't expect it or because I am temporarily unable to do it. Hypocritical? No, not at all. In fact, you are really similar to us, very similar. But Abai, who was born from Su Yuhang's and mine's genes, is very different from us. This child is essentially different from us. The children in the orphanage, we only selected you, but in the end they all became the audience. Jaime May has been following you. In order to make him better able to walk in the real world after you went to that place, you made arrangements very early. He slowly becomes your shadow. Tell me, what's the difference between you and us? What you said is too much. Lichi was not affected by Lu Menjiao's sarcasm. She just raised her chin slightly. If your strength is really like this, then I'm sorry. In an instant, Li Ji's momentum completely burst out. This woman once wiped out a city in the west. She went to that place and then came back. She was already famous, but her true strength actually exceeded her own reputation. Otherwise, why didn't anyone in the West take action to keep it? Because at that time, she was already so powerful that the people in the West were helpless. Haven't you always wanted to know how we avoid the broadcast's gaze? Lu Menjiao smiled slightly. I'll tell you now. Click. A slight crisp sound came out. Immediately afterwards, a white light enveloped Lichi. For the first time, a look of surprise appeared on Lichi's usually indifferent face. How can this be? How can this be? Nothing is impossible. Subai glanced at Hills, who was standing next to him, and continued to press his fingers into the skull's eye sockets, but the two blue fires that appeared in the skull's eye sockets still did not appear again. Burn. If I follow your thinking, then I have no idea what the purpose of this task is. Hills shrugged in confusion. The skeleton said before that the broadcast began to paralyze, similar to being poisoned. Subai knew clearly that the source of the poison should be himself, and this should be closely related to his cheap parents. I guessed it right. If so, there should be something wrong with the old housekeeper, right? Well, he was found, sitting motionless on the bed, Hills replied. This is very strange. Subai showed a playful look on his face and said with a smile, there is obviously something wrong with the broadcast. It is paralyzed. It's like a game suddenly crashes, and the scenes in the game are just like that. If they stop moving, the NPCs will also stop moving. For example, the old housekeeper has stopped moving. But have you ever thought about it? What is the identity of this guy? Isn't he a clone or NPC created by broadcasting? When the old housekeeper was on the verge of panicking and the broadcast began to paralyze, this guy suddenly came out and showed off his presence. He spoke and made actions. The timing is totally wrong. How could he still move at that time? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 859. Those who know Subai, such as Fatty, Monk and Lord Buddha, actually have a little bit of pity for Subai. For ordinary people, having a good parent who succeeds in fighting for his father is indeed something that makes others envious. But when this happened to Subai, it seemed a bit tragic, even a bit too tragic. It's just that Subai never seemed to have time to grieve his life experience. In other words, after learning the true identity of his parents, the subsequent blow was like the aftershock after the first big earthquake. He became numb and got used to it. Well, there really aren't many choices for myself. Therefore, in this story world, when Subai discovered that the source of the toxin was emanating from himself, when Subai heard the conversation between the skeleton and Suyuhang 20 years ago, when this skeleton danced and shouted, "The toxin has taken effect and the broadcast has begun to paralyze when these words are spoken." Subai's heart was relatively calm. He has become accustomed to seeing the backhand and calculations left by the man and the woman in himself, and at this time, he also realized that this time should be the real opportunity for the man and the woman, just like uncovering his last. The trump cards are the same, and the outcome of winning or losing depends on this one. At the same time, this seemed to be a relief for Subai, which meant that from this time on, he was no longer involved in the slightest with that man and woman. Therefore, Subai is still in a good mood. This cannot be blamed on Subai's mentality being a little wrong, or that he has a bit of Stockholm syndrome. The reason is because when the man and the woman were making arrangements, Subai was just a child. Even a ghost baby who had lost his body. At that time, Subai had no way to resist and didn't even realize how to resist. Going all the way to today can be considered an end in disguise. Subai took the red wine from Hill's hand, drank it in one gulp, then smiled and said, "I guess the real world is about to become chaotic now. There will be no chaos. Even if the radio suddenly goes down like a host, the audience circle in the real world will still be calm, even calmer than usual," Hill said with confidence. Obviously, you can completely put yourself in the perspective of those listeners in the real world. However, the chaos Subai is talking about does not refer to the chaos in the audience circle. The man and the woman will never give up this opportunity. They have been dormant and hidden for so long, not for self-cultivation. "Su, do you already know his name?" Hills looked at Subai seriously. "You must know that it will only take 10 hours for the world to collapse in this story, although he looks normal while drinking red wine. But no one wants to be buried in this story world in such an unclear way." "Absolutely," Subai nodded. "Actually, I can confirm now that there is really a big problem with the broadcast. Even if I can't know the situation in the real world now, the tasks released from this broadcast and judging from the answers I got, the current broadcast has become extremely chaotic. Even it may not be what it used to be." "You still haven't told me the answer." Hills shook his head dissatisfiedly. "Do you want me to find you a tape recorder and play a BGM you like, then gather everyone and you can slowly walk out of the darkness? Come and announce the final result. Or I'll give you an anesthesia injection and you sleep here while I hide behind the table." Subai reluctantly withdrew his hand from the skull's eye socket. "Although I don't know what this sentence means, but if nothing else, it should come from the cartoon called Conan that you told me before, right?" Subai took 2 steps back non-committally and looked at Hills. "Actually, this story world is still 10 hours away from collapse. Let's not consider the equivalence of time flow between this story world and the real world for the time being, but I still feel that as the two of us, we can stay at this time. In the story world, it is the wisest choice to wait until the outside calms down and the results come out before going back. No, I choose to refuse. I don't like this proposal. The real world must be very exciting now, how can I miss it? Hills directly rejected Subai's proposal. But after you return to the real world, your range of activities is from your place to my place. You can't get out at all. You are completely unaware of the movements and changes outside. Moreover, you should have guessed some of it yourself. I can tell you more openly that there is a problem with the broadcast. To use an old Chinese saying, Qin will lose its place and the whole world will chase it away. Broadcasting will not have problems for no reason. There must be someone behind it. We are the guardians of the place of enlightenment. Now if we return to the place of enlightenment, let me ask you a question. If the broadcast changes greatly, or even overturns, can you guarantee that the pattern of the place of enlightenment will remain the same? First, I don't think broadcasting will really be overthrown. Second, I also think that the place of enlightenment should be a place that will exist forever. Subai interrupted Hills directly. Hiles, I don't believe you can see, what's the significance of the place of enlightenment? It's just a collection room of the broadcast, and those tombstones are just the collection of the broadcast. But just like people, interests and hobbies may change. Once broadcasting no longer intends to continue collecting, is it still necessary for the two places of enlightenment in the East and the West to exist? Your reason is really... Hills was suddenly stunned for a moment, and then a look of disbelief and fear appeared on his face. His hands began to tremble slightly, but he still pointed at the skeleton in front of him and asked, Su, what the hell is it? What it is, you should be familiar with it, but also, after you took the train to that place, you probably haven't experienced this white light teleportation for a long time, Lu Menjiao said, looking at Lichi in front of him. White light is very familiar and very nostalgic. At least, when Lu Menjiao saw this white light falling, she felt a lot in her heart, as if she could smell the rhythm of life before. Every time the white light falls, it means either a new beginning or the end of a paragraph, but unfortunately, this time the white light did not touch her, but just covered Lichi. Immediately, Lichi's figure disappeared with the disappearance of the white light. The bloody corpse that had escaped from that place was unable to resist the forceful pull of the white light even after being informed of its identity by broadcast, and was finally suppressed and killed by broadcast in the story world. Now, the person standing in front of him was gone. Lu Menjiao didn't feel much joy in his heart. However, no matter what his mood was, he still had to do what he should do. Her figure floated over the Terracotta Warriors and Horses History Museum, then she raised her hand and slowly closed her eyes. At this time, it seems that many memories from the past are emerging in my mind one by one. The people, things, and scenes from that year come back one after another. 20 years. For an ordinary person, it is an inseparable part of life, but if there is no particularly huge accident or change, it is actually difficult to completely separate a person from his original circle in 20 years. But for the audience, 20 years is really a change of generations. Those who were able to enter the story world with her and cooperate with her to stab her in the back either fell into the story world or fell into the world. On the garbage pile at the end of the train. Rise. Lu Menjiao let out a slight sigh, and then began to slowly raise his hands upward. There was no loud noise that shook the earth, nor the roar of war drums, nor the courage of an iron horse. Just strips of white light rose up from the depths of the ground, gathered into a white body and began to surround Lu Menjiao. The terracotta warriors and horses that had not been developed and had been buried deep in the ground also lost their color at this time, becoming darker than those that were excavated, and at the same time, cracks began to appear on their bodies. Lu Menjiao used both hands to control this huge white drill. For a while, several scars appeared on the originally white and smooth hands, and blood began to flow out. These white drills were transformed from the Qin army's fighting spirit buried underground. They were so sharp that even Lu Menjiao still couldn't control them freely. Looked up. Lu Menjiao looked into the sky. 20 years, no, more than 20 years. The fear you brought to me, the depression you brought to me. Today. I want to give it back to you. I can feel your breath of paralysis, I can feel your powerlessness at this moment, I can feel your confusion now. Then, let me give you another ride. And at this moment, all the listeners in the East and the West, and all the listeners in the world, felt their chests tighten at this moment, and the feeling of pain and suffocation suddenly came, but as usual, it went as quickly as it came. Only this time, when the audience subconsciously picked up their mobile phones to browse. But I didn't receive any notification about new missions and new story worlds. At this time, in the East, a woman carried a waterfall-like Balian from bottom to top and rushed into the sky. Wherever Balian passed, it seemed that even the sky had been cleaned. In the West, a man carried a palace up the stairs, walking step by step towards the sky. The space in and around the palace emitted a deafening vibration, mixed with the angry roars of the dead souls inside the power supply. All the senior audience members and above almost subconsciously raised their heads and looked at the top of their heads at this moment. A feeling like this suddenly arose in everyone's heart. Like, things are going to change. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 860. Who is it? Subai smiled. Hasn't the answer already been told to us? In fact, I really don't want to tell the answer now and then return to the real world. I really suggest that we give it a try again here. Stay for a few hours. But you have already told me the answer. My choice is to still disagree. Hill's attitude was very firm. I don't want to miss it, even if it is just to feel it from a distance in a place that feels like enlightenment. I still don't want to give up the opportunity. In fact, maybe you can get a more intuitive experience here. Subai looked at the skeleton in front of him and said. In fact, Subai was not very sure about one thing, that is, the identity of Zhao transformed by the skeleton. The relationship between Su and Yuhang seems to be too harmonious. From Su Yuhang's actions to the current results, the 20 years of planning and motives, and the source of confidence of both parties, everything can be explained smoothly, except the motivation of this skeleton. In the end, Why do this? Haha, let me try it first to see if your guess is correct. If it is correct. Hills hesitated for a moment, and then, having mustered up the courage to prepare, he was about to open his mouth and shout out skeleton when he heard his name. He was shocked to find that his whole body was trapped in an absolute confinement. His strength had been inexplicably sealed at the beginning, and now it was imprisoned, which made him completely like a piece of meat on a chopping board, with no room for resistance and struggle. Regarding this accident and change, Subai seemed very calm. In this story world, the radio has collapsed. It is no longer the radio that abides by its own duties and rules, but seems to be a little, random. Turn around. The skeleton that was standing there quietly, the two balls of blue light and fire deep in its eye sockets slowly reappeared. This ball of light and fire did not look at Hills, who was about to call out its name just now, but stared at Su. White eyes are the windows to the human soul, but in fact, if the eyes are represented by fire, it seems that it is easier to express deep emotions. For example, now Subai could clearly see the teasing and ridicule in the other person's eyes, just like when Master Xian looked at him through a glass container 20 years ago. You violated the rules, Subai reminded. I have no intention of breaking the rules. You have finished the story world. I just want to keep you here for a while. The skeleton's voice did not sound crazy at first, but revealed a kind of wisdom and calmness, even though it was a skeleton. But they seem like two completely different people. But in any case, this is not in line with the rules of broadcasting, and it is the rule set by you. Subai still insisted on his idea. He already knows the answer, but you made him unable to say it, which is very disruptive to your usual behavior. Beauty in our hearts. Destruction or not, only the two of you know. Moreover, all his senses have been blocked by me, and he doesn't know what is happening now, so in fact, you are the only one who knows. And you already knew it, didn't you? When this mission is released, you actually know in your heart that in this story world and this time point, everyone else is actually a foil, and you are the real participant. Haha, if you, the poison introduction, can be regarded as a participant. The words of the author. You want to keep me a little longer, do you want my poison to spread here a little longer? You should have discovered that the toxins on your body have actually dissipated. In fact, it is not a toxin at all. It is non-toxic and harmless, because it is just a self-restarting program, just like the antivirus software in your computer. Same, can you say it is a virus? The skeleton raised his arm and put his withered white bone hand on Subai's shoulder. Today is a relief for you, but at the same time, it is very likely that it is a virus. The beginning of a new nightmare. It will be the beginning of a new nightmare for everyone listening. I'm not used to your way of speaking. Subai reached out to remove the other person's skeletal hand from his shoulder, and then continued, in the eyes of many people, you are the absolute master, far more than an idol. The meaning is even more profound than a totem, but your words and deeds just now made me feel like my impression was shattered. To be honest, seeing it is worth hearing it 100 times. The skeleton was not angry at all when Subai repeatedly refuted him, but behind this lack of anger was a kind of disdain and contempt, not so-called magnanimity. At this time, it was his plan, and even Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao were just his helpers. As for Subai, he was nothing more than an ordinary prop. Changes are happening outside, I think you should know. The skeleton waved his hand. A water blue light screen appeared in the center of the laboratory, and Subai saw two figures flying in mid-air in the light screen. Two people. One of them is his father. The other is my mother. Su Yuhang carried the palace, and Lu Menjiao carried Pai Lian. The two of them were as powerful as a rainbow and moved forward indomitably. This must be the first time in 20 years that they have been so tough. Subai sighed. These two people had been hiding their heads for 20 years, and today they finally had an erection. It's okay. The skeleton seemed unwilling to comment much on this aspect. Two huge cracks appeared in the sky on the screen. Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao entered the cracks directly. In a daze, a ripple began to ripple, and even Subai's current position was slightly shaken. Trembling. At this time, the audience who were looking for clues in Zhao's villa also felt the shock. They subconsciously thought it was a sign that the story world was about to collapse, so they began to search more anxiously for anything that could provide information. In fact, according to what Subai said, this is indeed an unbalanced story mission, whether it is its release, its process, and the current result. Just as Hills, who was about to shout out the answer, was directly imprisoned, in this story world, broadcasting has violated its own code of conduct several times in a row. I don't know what your purpose is. Subai looked at the skeleton. Is it just because you have been a broadcaster for too long and too boring, so you want to take the initiative to explain yourself? The two blue flames in the skull's eyes became obviously more intense when Subai said these words. It was a little excited. Yes. Excited. I didn't expect that in the end, you still understood me. Is this really the case? Subai took a deep breath and spit it out heavily. What does all this mean? I don't need to explain too much to you, but I can tell you the fact that I really plan to free myself. Crazy. This comment came out of Subai's mouth. The skeleton didn't think so, but said with a little regret, but these two people won't believe it. Even if they are willing to believe it, they will never really bet everything on this unreasonable trust of wishful thinking. Subai shrugged, not to mention them. The skeleton turned around, with his back to Subai, and then said quietly, there are many people below who are paying attention. But in fact, no matter what the ending is today, their fate and the rules here will not change. But one thing will change, Subai said. What? It belongs to the aesthetics of broadcasting, Subai replied. Haha, aesthetic, hee, aesthetic. The skeleton's body began to slowly slump, and it curled up together, as if the sea had shrunk, and the whole person melted into a ball, and then it began to turn black slowly, exuding waves of stench. You can leave. This means that Subai can tell the answer and let the story world end. You don't have a name, because a name means nothing to you, Subai said solemnly. The main mission is completed, now everyone returns to the real world. All the audience members who were still rummaging through various things in search of clues were stunned at this moment, and then began to be ecstatic again. They didn't know who was so powerful that they had found the correct answer, but this would not hinder them. I feel happy and grateful to be freed from the ending of being buried in this story world. Rays of white light enveloped 9 people at the same time. Only the group of white bones was left curled up there. After all the listeners here were teleported away, 2 ripples appeared, revealing the figures of Su Yuhang and Lu Menjiao. According to the previous plan, you shouldn't have appeared here, the skeleton sighed. It won't take long for the rules to be restarted, and you don't have much time to waste here. I'm sorry, I just wanted to come and see you, my friend. Zhao Su Yuhang took 2 steps forward and stood next to the skeleton. That once confident scientist, that hidden rich man, that guy with such a strong charisma that even Su Yuhang himself couldn't help but want to befriend. Su Yuhang had already guessed his true identity. It is said that the radio is afraid of him, so it only dares to let him die but does not dare to let him become a listener. This is just an excuse, because it is the radio itself. Do you think it's ridiculous? Skull asked calmly. As a will born from the rules, I actually chose to liberate myself, break the rules myself, leave the rules myself, and even join forces with you. Zhao, I'm curious, what is the reason for all this? Su Yuhang asked. 2,000 years ago, that guy named Alexander, he did not hesitate to die just to teach me one thing. What's up? Play. The skeleton's answer was very concise and to the point. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 861. The cold coffin lid, the underworld still rolling in the distance, and the ghosts of the wreckage screaming and howling all day long in the underworld. Well, there are 2 black cats. Everything was so familiar. When Subai was teleported back here, he felt like he was in another world. The story world this time is actually very abrupt and simple, but the changes caused by the connection formed by the story world are more shocking than any previous story world. Subai leaned against the coffin, frowning slightly. There were a lot of things, and he didn't know which one he should think about first. Are you thinking about whether Su Yuhang and the others can succeed? Which choice will they make? Or is he thinking about whether the intention of the skeleton is really what he said, or if the consciousness of the broadcast changes, will the place of enlightenment on his side also change? But one thing is certain, no matter what the external developments are or what the results are, it seems that I can only think blindly in this place of enlightenment. Because can't get out at all. While Subai was thinking about these things, the other coffins in front of him began to tremble. Subai pushed gently with his hand, and one of the coffins was forcibly moved to a position, and the trembling of the other coffins also stopped. But soon, these coffins began to tremble again. Subai pushed the coffin next to him a certain distance, and the surroundings became quiet again. But not long after, the coffins began to tremble again. Subai took a deep breath and let it out slowly without doing anything else. Soon, a red light flashed out from the center of the coffin. After the red light dissipated, Hill's figure was revealed inside. You did it on purpose, you did it on purpose. Hills had failed to teleport there several times before. The only explanation was naturally that Subai on the other side of the teleportation was causing trouble. It's very annoying, Subai said impatiently. Are you as upset as someone like me who is completely kept in the dark? Hills squatted down directly in front of Subai. There was less than 10 centimeters between his face and Subai's. Subai could see that Hill's face and eyes were full of eagerness, like a man who was dissatisfied with his desires. Quickly, tell me everything you know, Hills urged impatiently. I don't know anything. Subai shook his head, as if he knew a lot but was too lazy to have sex with you. You. Hills simply sat down next to Subai and leaned against the coffin lid. Since you don't want to say it, that's fine. It's better to be in a daze with two people than alone. Subai thought to himself that only you feel this way, right? He originally planned to lie down directly in the coffin, but in the end Subai did not do so because he was worried that Hills would also lie down in the same coffin with him. Although the internal space of the coffin was very large, Subai still had no interest in sleeping with him. A man closes the coffin. What would you say is the biggest change? Hills asked. Are you referring to the big aspect or the small aspect? What do you mean by small aspects? The small side is certainly where we are now and where you are. Let's talk about the small aspects first. The biggest small change is that all the tombstones here have begun to be destroyed or sealed. The place of enlightenment has completely lost its meaning of existence. Then you and I are unemployed, haha, but unemployment is for the two of us. It's like regaining freedom, Subai said easily. Because in Subai's view, the place of enlightenment is a collection room for broadcasting, similar to Zhu Haozao's leopard room in the Ming dynasty. This incident does not mean that broadcasting has disappeared, but it just means that the group entrenched in broadcasting the awareness of the rules may change, but the rules and operations of broadcasting still exist and will always exist. Just like the leopard room was closed after Zhu Haozao's death, for the Ming dynasty it was just a change of emperor, and the political power and the country continued to operate as usual. Freedom, Hills repeated. Just understand it this way, radio is still radio, this program, this column will still be heard on time, but the program planner and announcer have been changed. Subai made an analogy and continued, but this program, the essence of broadcasting will not change, and the operational meaning of broadcasting will not change. Are these just your guesses? Hills asked hesitantly. His identity was different from Subai. Subai was the pawn in this incident. The information he obtained and the perspective of his position were naturally different from Hills's. Even most of the boss-level listeners outside are confused now, let alone the non-boss level listeners who are trapped here and cannot accept the news from the outside. That is to say, the information that Hills can simply get is too limited. It was limited, which was why he couldn't wait to come to Subai after returning to the real world. Are you guessing? Before Subai could finish speaking, he suddenly paused. What's wrong? Hills asked. Suddenly, it became quiet. Subai stood up immediately. Yes, it suddenly became quiet here, a strange and unusual quiet. Immediately afterwards, Subai's figure disappeared on the spot. The next moment, Subai appeared on the altar. At this time, two black cats, Jixiang and Ruyi, were also standing on the altar. The two black cats also stared with wide eyes. The underworld below. Huan Quan. It's freezing. Layer after layer of ice is constantly covering it. The endless and endless reincarnation of the underworld water finally stops at this time. Also frozen are the countless dead souls in the underworld. Their howls screaming cannot love being heard again. Really, is it over? Hill's figure also appeared next to Subai. He looked at the scene in front of him and was a little dazed. Since this change has occurred in the Eastern Proving Land, then his Western Proving Land, the land of Tao, should also be undergoing changes. It is sealing the tombstones under the yellow spring. Subai said, from today on, no one will be able to come here to steal the tombstones and understand them, including ourselves. After that, no one will need to come to prove the truth. Hills added, there is no point in us continuing to be here. Coming to the place to prove the Tao is actually just a formality. Whether you are enlightened or not will not affect your strength. At most, it will give you one more opportunity to think about yourself, that is, introspection. Those who come to prove the Tao are actually coming here. By that time, he was already at the level of a big shot audience. Therefore, once the broadcast begins to seal these tombstones and freeze the entire underworld, it means that in the future, people will no longer be able to come here to preach. The first two words of place of proving the Tao will lose their meaning, and then this place will also be completely losing the basis of its independent existence. The jade seal of the Dian kingdom on the altar also floated at this time. Subai watched it fly straight into the underworld. Before the river completely froze, it sank into it. It was obviously meant to be sealed together. The expressions of Jixiang and Ruyi at this time were a little surprised and at a loss. After all, Subai had only stayed here for less than half a year, but Jixiang and Ruyi had probably been here since they could remember. The place of enlightenment, even if Jixiang has left here, this is its home after all. At this moment, both black cats felt a sad mood. They knew that their home would probably disappear. Do you think it's ridiculous? Subai said to Hills next to him. Many generations of guardians in the West have had many conflicts here, but in the end, this is the result. It's gone, it's all gone. But Hills shook his head. Your guess is right, Su. You know, I'm starting to worry now, once the broadcast loses its aesthetic and its bad taste. So, what will be the situation waiting for our listeners? After hearing what Hills said, Subai suddenly thought of what the skeleton had said before. Today, for you, is a relief, but at the same time, it is likely to be the beginning of a new nightmare. For all listeners, it will be the beginning of a new nightmare. Is it the beginning of a nightmare? Subai closed his eyes and sighed. Although he often cursed and complained about the so-called aesthetics and bad taste of radio, once it became clear that these would be completely gone, a feeling of reluctance appeared in his heart. The future story world, if nothing else, should be more direct, colder, rougher, and simpler. Subai said this. The difference is that it was originally a poison. In the past, it was wrapped with a layer of honey. Now, it is clearly poison that is stuffed into your mouth. Hills waved his hand. Since the tombstone has been sealed, it seems it's time to go out. When the collection room is no longer liked by the owner will probably not hire anyone to look after it. Just when Hills finished speaking, at the entrance, the formation began to activate on its own, and the white light also changed from dim to bright, which meant that the formation had been activated. The meaning here is very simple. The things have been sealed, and the people who originally looked at the things here can also be laid off. Turning around, facing the white light on that side, Subai did not rush out first, but felt a little ridiculous and shook his head. Su Fugui has been lying here for 20 years, and many generations of Western guardians have come here and been killed by Su Fugui. But now, both for Su Fugui and for so many generations of Western guardians, the final outcome is, it seemed to be the most ruthless mockery of them. Suddenly I feel that my previous work has no meaning at all. It depends entirely on the change of the king's interests. Hills sighed. In China, those who do such things for the king are usually eunuchs. Subai gave Hills a stab and also himself. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 862. Chapter 862. Long is still on the train now. He will start typing as soon as he settles down in Chongqing, but it should be late at night. Everyone should get up and watch it tomorrow. I would like to inform you here. Don't panic, hold on tight to the dragon.